Advertising Council Australia would like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which we broadcast today. ACA would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance and music, and we pay respect to the elders past, present and future on other lands throughout all communities who might be participating today.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, or maybe it's even good morning for some over in the Europe or the UK. Welcome, everybody, wherever you are. And a very special welcome to my co-moderator today, Kim Portrait from Think TV. I'm sure that most of you know Kim, and if it wasn't for Think TV being marquee sponsor of the partner of the Australian Effies, which they've been for about 5 years, we wouldn't be able to publish reports such as this. So a great thank you. This has now also enabled us to build, I think we started 5 years ago, it also enabled us to build our own effectiveness database. And we've got 380 cases on this published at the moment. And that's allowed us, I think, over the last few years to publish these. And now, very excitedly, we're now publishing this one today. This actual report is now available online in either a PDF or a printed format. And there's also a bunch of nickable charts that can be downloaded as well. And just to this webinar itself will also be posted in the next few days. So a couple of quick words about the webinar. Firstly, as you might have already gathered, it's being recorded so we can post it online. But also, most of you would be very familiar with Zoom, and we're encouraging you to post questions throughout into the Q&A box that you can see there, not the chat box, but into the Q&A box, and then we will get to those questions later. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is hand over to Kim.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, this evening, this morning, or midday. We are delighted to partner with the Ad Council on this particular project, and particularly excited this afternoon because we're able to bring you collectively the 3 amigos of effectiveness. This afternoon, you'll hear from Peter Field, who needs really no introduction, a strategist and a marketer with over 30 years experience. He's deep into what works in advertising and why. He'll be joined by Karen Nelson-Field, arguably a world leader in attention and why it's important, but not just the theory of. One of the things I adore about Karen is that she has a very pragmatic approach so that it can be used to make business results better. And then our own homegrown expert, Rob Britton, who has done a lot of work using the effectiveness database with Australian campaigns so that those of us locally can be certain that the results are reliable and rigorous. Together, these 3 very bright minds are going to present to you what I think is a world first, a report and an analysis and a summary on effective campaigns, but I think for the first time, bringing in share of voice, creative impact, and media selection, which I've not been able to find anywhere else in the world. So a unique and comprehensive study, but I don't want to steal their thunder. Certainly they have done all of this incredible work. At that point, I think I'll hand over to Peter Field without too much fuss to kickstart the main game this afternoon. Peter, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks very much. So this report clearly is going to build on the work done last year that looked at the importance of ESOV, but just a word of intro, because I think this is a very important build on that. Last year at Cannes, Karen and I argued that the ESOV model that links ad spend to growth was breaking down because advertising dollars were now unreliably linked to advertising impacts. Essentially, video advertisers are buying digital impressions, but getting largely unknown, highly variable, and often very low levels of attention for these impressions. And that's even when they are served to real human beings. Now, to fix this, Karen has argued worldwide for a new attention-weighted currency, but bizarrely, not everyone out there accepts the value of attention to advertising effectiveness. So Rob and Karen have genuinely pulled together a world first today. There's nothing quite like it. The combination of rigorous in-market effectiveness data from the ACA database with world-class video attention data from Karen's company, Amplified Intelligence. And they will prove to you that attention matters to effectiveness, that it matters very much. So first up, Rob will forensically examine the link between attention and effectiveness. And he'll do that to explore that criticism that attention is unimportant. Now, I think you can probably guess what I think of that criticism, but judge for yourself after hearing Rob. And he's also going to examine the impact of high attention media choices on the effectiveness of video advertising versus the alternative low attention media. Karen then will build on this to explain Rob's observations. Her company's data is perhaps best known for revealing the huge variability of video platforms' ability to generate attention, which of course is not costed into their pricing. But also our data is going to help us reveal just how few online video ads actually reach the critical threshold level of attention to stand any chance of building brands and driving effectiveness. So I shall use all of that to explore what is the vital importance of good media selection on effectiveness, that it is our media choices that essentially decide how effective we can be. Now, this is going to come as something of a shock to people like me who have come from creative agencies. But let's be clear, the data is not saying creative is unimportant. What it is saying is that media choices impose unbreakable limits on how well our ads can perform. A great ad is doomed to failure on a poor platform. But of course, we do still need great ads to prosper as businesses. But it is essential, of course, that in future, advertising dollars align to attentive seconds, not impressions, if we're going to fix that broken ESOV model that we absolutely have to. But I would hate us to miss that important outcome of this research, that the study does genuinely illustrate the importance of the creative dimension amongst media issues. And many of the case study ads in this study are strong performers in an attention-grabbing sense, even allowing for the limitations of the media that they operated in, which is clearly vital. So it is clear that creative quality also matters to attention and therefore effectiveness. And mischievously, I'll end just by adding that it looks to me like top performers mostly achieve that by not following what are often touted as best practice rules for online video ads. Now, it's far too soon to go into any detail on this, but maybe next year we'll be ready to look at this. Just watch this space. So that's enough from me. Over to you now, Rob.
Okay, hello everybody. So thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone. So I think we'll just get started. So as all good analysis does, we're building on the learnings from our previous paper. And so into ESOV and beyond, we delved deeply into the effects of ESOV, and we showed the power of using video assets and talked to the importance of creative strength, all three of which are critical drivers of mental availability growth. And then we linked these to business growth, and that was a first. That linkage between ESOV, mental availability, and business effects, and shown that in a really tangible way. However, the paper also identified key risks to the ESOV methodology. And as Peter just mentioned, a key one of those is the dysfunction in the media pricing model. And by this, we mean the breaking of the relationship between cost per impression and effectiveness per impression. And that's the very relationship that ESOV relies on. So essentially, you should pay more for more effective impressions and less for less effective impressions. But this isn't always the case. And that means that you may not be getting the share of voice that you're paying for. Karen Nelson-Field also contributed to the paper, and she showed that it's the differing levels of attention paid to advertising between media platforms that's at the heart of this. So in this new analysis, we go deeper into the effects of media selection and creative strength, and then we're going to revisit the importance of ESOV in this context. So we did this by taking a random selection of case studies from the ACA Effectiveness database. So we took 39 Australian FE case studies. And what we did is we partnered with Karen and we tested the attention levels of their video spots. And it's this integration of attention metrics within market effectiveness data that's world first. And it enables us to take a big step forwards in understanding the effect of attention on real world business results. And it's at a scale that we haven't been able to do before. Now, for us, attention is our measure of creative strength. As strong creative is able to hold an audience's attention for longer. Our test platform was YouTube, and we had a mixture of short, medium, and longer spot lengths that we tested on that. Now, if you're interested in terms of the sample, the design of it, and some of those finer details, then you can find all those in the report. Now, simply put, active attention is pure gold. And this is when eyes are on the ad and they're directly watching it. So it's not going on in their peripheral vision. People are focusing directly on the ad. And because of this, active attention has been shown to have a very strong relationship and a significant relationship with memory retention, so how long it actually stays in people's memory, with mental availability growth, and with brand choice uplift. So people choose brands more when active attention is higher. However, there is a major caveat to that, and that's branding. And if the linkages to the brand are weak or not present when the ad is being actively viewed, then the advertising is a waste of time and money for everyone involved. And you'll see this when Karen talks a bit later on, often how fleeting that attention can be. Now, to start things off, we're going to run a quick poll, get a little bit of audience participation from all of you out there. And so we know that active attention is advertiser gold. So how much of it do you think an effective 30-second spot would achieve on an online video channel like YouTube? So in a moment, I'm going to ask for a poll to be launched, and that's going to pop up on your screen in front of you. And you can respond to that poll. There we go, I think it's come up. So can you please select the answer that you believe is closest to the mark? So please go ahead. We'll keep it open for about 30 seconds or so. And then we'll close the poll and we'll have a quick look at the results before we go any further. Okay, we'll give it about another 10 seconds or so. Just give everyone a chance. Okay, could you please close the poll and publish the results? Okay, so we can see from that the vast majority of people are saying it's pretty short. So if we look up to about 7.5 seconds, what's that? That's probably about 80% of people. So to be honest, you're on the right track. About half of people say between 2.6 and 5 seconds. Okay, so we're just going to close that off, and then we're going to go into what the data says. So from Amplified Intelligence's work, we know that for an ad spot to be effective, it takes just 2.5 seconds of active attention. And that's the point at which the ad starts to impact memory. So that's when it actually really starts to kick in. So when we think back to that poll, probably about half of us, in fact, the majority of us were quite well over that. So in order for it to start to be effective, you've got to reach that 2.5 second benchmark. Now, it might actually seem like quite a low bar to clear. I mean, particularly given that, different spot lengths, 50 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, so forth. But the majority of ads fail to achieve even this. So again, from Karen's research, looking at 130,000 ad views over 1,000 brands, 85% of them fail to achieve that 2.5 second benchmark. And Karen will talk more about what people's attention looks like later on in this session, but suffice to say, it really is a short window within which to convey the message. the assets and the devices which link to the brand. And so we can see now how making good, strong creative advertising is extremely difficult given the levels of attention that they often get. Now, in terms of our sample that we ran, so the 39 case studies that we looked at, they all showed high creative strength. So even the weaker spots easily cleared that 2.5 second threshold. And you can see there from the chart that they're up to about 12 seconds. And then there's a minimum of around about 3.5 to 4 seconds. Now, given we're talking about the Effie Awards, that's probably not surprising. But it also immediately infers a link between attention and effectiveness. And as you'll see also that it looks like there's a fair bit of variation in the sample. However, from a statistical standpoint, the difference is actually quite small, and it's within the bounds of what would be expected on the platform that we tested on. However, a big problem that we have is that we can't just draw a straight line between performance on the test platform and campaign effectiveness. And this is because of what is referred to as platform elasticity. And for those of you who follow Karen and Amplified Intelligence, you'll know that that's a term that they recently introduced into the market in the last few months. And essentially what it means is the functionality of the platform determines the boundaries of how much attention creative can achieve. The data in front of you is from a real world example of this. And in this example, platform A has the lowest attention elasticity, and platform D on the right-hand side has the highest. So within this, platform A has the tightest attention boundary. There's the minimum amount of stretch in creative that goes on that platform in terms of the attention it can receive. So the difference between strong and weak performing creative on platform A will be very small. Whereas platform D has the widest boundary. And so this is where great creative actually really gets to spread its wings. And you'll see this as we go through the presentation. We talked about low attention platforms, and that's things like platform A, and higher attention platforms, which is when we're referring to things like platform D. Now, if you look at the two examples in there, there's actually 12 in the whole data set. It's been publicly published by Karen and Amplified Intelligence, but taking just 2 of those, we can see that the strength of ad 1 isn't fully realized until it's on platform D. So on platform A, it achieves the same as ad 2, which is weaker. It slowly builds, but on platform D, you can see it receives an extra 3 seconds almost of attention. And that's because of that wide boundary that platform delivers. And it's impressions that are delivered on a platform such as platform D in this that have a much bigger impact on the audience's memory. So clearly, this is something that we need to account for in our analysis. Now, as would be expected, the media plans supporting each campaign were different. So we had to account for how spend within each of those campaigns was invested across different platforms. And so what we've done is we've adjusted the attention seconds to be reflective of what would have been achieved at the campaign level. And we've done that using norms that have been provided by Amplified Intelligence. And they look at the relative performance across different platforms by spot length and across between the different platforms. Now, in case you're wondering, we can't share these because they're proprietary to Amplified Intelligence. But what it does mean is that the average attention seconds that we refer to are much more representative of what the spot would have achieved at the campaign level. And this was a big unlock when we were working through the analysis, and you'll see this shortly. But if we focus on the data in the chart in front of you, this is from 2 spots in our sample. And creatively, both spots were very similar strength. They both achieved 5.2 active attention seconds on the test platform. However, the spot above was weighted its investment towards lower attention platforms, whereas the one below weighted its investment towards higher attention platforms. And as you can see, this has a huge impact on the campaign level. So you have 2 ads that essentially perform the same. But when you aggregate it up based on the media plan, one of them actually achieved more than double the average attentive seconds as the other one. So we'll have a look at this in a moment, the impact of this in a moment. But before we do this, we're going to go, before we go into more detail, we'll take a quick step backwards. And so first of all, just as a bare bones look at attention and effectiveness, what we did is we divided the sample into lower effectiveness campaigns and higher effectiveness campaigns. And this was simply based on the amount of very large business effects that they created, that they pushed. And what we see is that higher effectiveness campaigns, typically, they receive more attention. And this holds when we look within spot length. So we've got all the spot lengths in there and then just the 30 seconds on the right-hand side. And so whilst 0.9 seconds doesn't sound like much, in the context of the 2.5 second memory threshold, it does start to become a really quite tangible amount. And we also see a clear relationship with achievement of campaign objectives. So the sample splits roughly 50-50 between long-term brand building campaigns and short-term sales activation campaigns. Now, the brand building campaigns have a broad effect across all metrics, whereas the short-term campaign effects are much more focused on the short-term metrics. So short-term sales response, customer acquisition. And some of you may have seen that this was recently reported by System 1, this broad versus narrow effect. And we've seen this exact same thing in our data for the last four years that we've been doing this. But interestingly, in our sample, the short-term sales activation campaigns actually gained more attention. But this doesn't mean that they have a greater breadth of effect. You know, they don't start to affect long-term metrics. What they do is they have an even stronger effect in the short term. So attention means that the creative works better at what it was designed to do. It doesn't start doing stuff that it wasn't intended to. Longer term focused creative will work even stronger over the long term. Shorter term creative will work even stronger over the shorter term, but they tend not to bleed into each other. Okay, so now we're going to turn our attention back to the impact of how media investment is allocated. And to do this, we've split the sample into lower and higher attention platforms. So the lower attention platforms contains the campaigns that had 50% or more of their investment allocated to platforms with low attention elasticity. And vice versa, the higher attention platforms had 50% or more of their investment allocated to the platforms with high attention elasticity. Now, on the test platform, average seconds was pretty similar. You can see that on the left-hand side, 5.6 versus 5.9. So there isn't really much difference in the creative strength between the two groups. It was slightly stronger on the high attention platforms by 0.3 seconds, but not by a great amount. But then when we look at what happens with the adjusted number, all of a sudden there's a real significant amplification caused by the media channel application or allocation. And so that 0.3 second difference suddenly increases by 3.2 seconds. And that's the amplification that we're talking about. And so, you know, just remember that it only takes 2.5 seconds to impact memory. So it's on these higher attention platforms that strong creative can really spread its wings. And the differences in effectiveness are large. Because remember, we're looking at the top end of the effectiveness spectrum here. And we're seeing a really large difference between lower attention platforms and higher attention platforms. So when you weight investment towards those higher attention platforms, it enables the creative to drive stronger gains in mental availability. And it's these stronger gains in mental availability that underpin a much stronger impact on hard business metrics, such as customer acquisition, profit, and market share growth. So it raises the question after our previous paper, where does it leave ESOV? Yeah, it's a powerful methodology, but the video pricing model is working against it. So to look at this further, we split those higher and lower attention platform groups to look at the effect of ESOV. So in the next couple of slides, you're going to see 3 sample groupings. So these are campaigns that are weighted towards lower attention platforms that are supported by negative ESOV. So they invest at a level that's below their market share, a share of voice below their market share. Then you're going to see campaigns that are weighted towards lower attention platforms that are supported by positive ESOV, so ones with a higher intensity of investment relative to their size. And then you're going to see campaigns that are weighted towards higher attention platforms that are also supported by positive ESOV. Now, there was one group that we weren't able to break out because the sample size was too small, and that was the higher attention, low ESOV sample, but we're able to show the other 3. Now, first of all, it's interesting to note that the strongest creative was actually on the lower attention platforms that were supported with negative ESOV. And that's on the left-hand side. You can see that in the grey bar, so 6 seconds. As can be seen on the bars on the far right-hand side, positive ESOV mitigates some of the negative impact on campaign attention levels when campaigns are weighted towards those lower attention platforms. And that's that 0.4 second difference that you see between the grey bar and the black bar on the right-hand side. But it's when positive ESOV is weighted towards higher attention platforms that the really big jump occurs. And this is the difference between the black and gold bars. And that's where that difference suddenly increases by 3 seconds. So that's nearly an entire order of magnitude larger when positive ESOV is invested into higher attention platforms versus lower attention platforms. And we see this flow through to impacts on mental availability growth and hard business metrics. And so really, it's not surprising that that positive ESOV made campaigns on lower attention platforms work better. That would seem to be pretty obvious. What is surprising is how much these campaigns left on the table. So those lower attention platforms with positive ESOV, they left a significant amount of growth on the table. And that's that difference between the black and the gold bars. If they'd put more of the positive ESOV, weighted more of that investment to use on higher attention platforms, these campaigns would have been much more effective. So we're seeing that ESOV still remains an important planning methodology. And it's when positive ESOV and high attention media channels meet strong creative. And that combination is really where the magic happens. Now, it's clear from our data that when ESOV is lower, marketers tend to weight their investment towards lower attention platforms. And that's understandable because they feel like it's making their investment go further. But actually, it's a mistake. So whilst you'll be buying more impressions, what you gain in terms of more impressions is wiped out by the decline in effectiveness per impression. And the evidence suggests that cheaper, lower attention platforms actually aren't cheap enough. Now, I'm going to hand you over to Karen, who's going to explain in more detail why this is the case.
Thanks, Rob. I think, just let me turn my camera on. Hi, everyone. I love that. So leaving growth on the table. And I think I'm going to use that in presentations going forward because that's exactly what's happening here. And that's exactly what we've been trying to talk about for quite some time. And Peter, I also love your comment about you're still finding it hard to believe that you find it hard to believe people actually agree with the concept of attention, because constantly over and over, we're seeing real world examples of that. And this is one of them. So my job is to kind of talk a little bit about the why. And if you could just jump to my next slide. Thanks, Rob. And it's interesting because we have done a bit of work since 12 months has passed. And what we think we've discovered is what I'm going to start to call the original sin, if you like, or kryptonite, if you like. And what you're saying here is the absolute core reason why all this is happening. And it's happening because most digital formats are actually measured on the basis of time in view. So it's become, in modern measurement, the most critical independent variable. And yet the reality of this critical independent variable is that it fundamentally fails to tell us how much attention humans actually paid. Now, sure, it might tell us how much time on screen it's achieved, which is a delivery mechanism. But in terms of attention, what we actually know is there's very little relationship between attention and time in view. In fact, I think this is a sample of 60,000 ads, but we see it constantly. It's about a 1 in 3 chance that someone at that second is even looking. And the reason why this is happening is because of the next slide, is because people and humans don't behave in any kind of sustained and unbroken way. Basically, we get distracted, right? So you might have seen me present this before, because we are constantly looking at other things, not necessarily the ads on screen. And when we do that, and we switch between looking at the ad, but then reading something on the screen, or dual screening in the case of other platforms, or looking away. So active attention, passive attention, and non-attention. What happens is we're constantly switching. So when the time in view clicker is going, but we're not even looking at the ad, these gaps are not accounted for by time in view. And what we've worked out is that this fundamental measure is essentially critically, I guess, responsible for all of the flow-on effects that I've talked about before. So let me just start on the next slide. There was a point in time that this began, and we kind of have worked out, and this actually came off the back of some work we did last year as well in Cannes, but we sort of realized that the original sin happened when we stopped measuring what I call outward and started measuring only inward. And the difference is we used to measure humans and how humans interacted with media. And now we measure metadata or impression data and make assumptions about how humans behave. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. As I said, humans constantly switch, and that switching is not consistent between platforms. So it'd be easy if we could just add some sort of index to it and make it all kind of better, but it doesn't. So humans are constantly switching, and that switching variability changes. So everything changed when we decided to not measure humans and to only measure inward data, which is impression data. And this has massive flow-on effects. And I think people underestimate that. Just next slide, Rob. So the one that I've talked about the most, and it's interesting because this is the one I would have even started talking about a few years back, is viewability. And what I've kind of since worked out is that viewability is not the enemy, because viewability is, I guess, a victim of time in view failing it. So I talked most about how viewability measurement fails us, which is our current currency by default. And I often talk about around 70 to 75% of ads that you've paid for from an MRC or accredited standard don't actually deliver you any attention. But the reality is it's because it's using this critical import variable that it fails. So it's not the only thing. I mean, from a concept perspective, it's wonderful because at least it brings some sort of regulation back into an unregulated, was an unregulated ecosystem. But it's measurement, which, the concept of viewability is not responsible for, is what's causing this. But it goes further than that. So, some of you may have seen some of the recent work that I've published. Just Rob, next slide. And, this is exactly why this particular thing's happening as well. So it has flow-on effects to things like share of voice, share of market planning. So, and I know that, Rob's already talked about this, and Pete's quite a big advocate for the failure of this particular relationship, but it's happening because you might think you're getting a certain amount of impressions, but the reality is you're not. And then if you're in a competitive environment in terms of share of voice, and your competitor happens to spend more appropriately on not just high attention platforms, but at least not no attention platforms, your share of voice, share of market relationship completely fails. So anyone using this as an indicator of budgeting is completely going to fail. And this is a great evidence of what we're doing today. But there's more as well. Next slide. This is the one I'm super focused on at the moment. So this is one of those relationships that, we use every single day, as media planners have used every single day of our lives. and that is reach curves, which is the relationship between, you know, impression numbers and budget. But the reality is, because of the relationship failing in terms of how much you spend and how much impressions, how many impressions you get, the lacking of attention essentially downweights essentially the real curve. So the reality is it impacts it because we get less reach than we think, and on top of that, the budget that we spend gets us less reach. So traditional reach curves are completely broken. And as we move towards attention as a measurement, the idea that attention adjusted reach curves are implied or are used, ingested, will help at least planners understand the reality. And I think the next slide, please, Rob. You know, because the reality is, you know, just back from a reach curve perspective, most of us think that, you know, when we pay for, I mean, we pretty much understand that if we're paying for 30 seconds, in most cases, you don't get 30 seconds, but you don't really understand the decay, which looks like this. So the volume of impressions that you get decays quite fast. So you might think that you're getting 100% of the impressions that you buy viewing 100% of the time, but the reality is a lot more like this, where people sort of start watching up front and then quickly decline. And that decay curve, and this is what Rob's been using, changes quite drastically by different platforms. So it has impact, obviously, if you're getting 20% volume versus, let's just call it 70% volume from your reach curve perspective. But this is really interesting as well. It also impacts the brand experience. And again, most people really don't understand the difference. But we looked recently across, I think it's 100 brands representing more than 1,000 branded moments. And what we can see is, you know, the branding component is super, super vital, because Rob sort of talked about the importance of creative. The importance of creative is that it leads you, I guess, a shopper to a viewer to a sale. But in most cases, you know, the lack of attention, particularly up front, is not kind of accounted for in how people brand their creative. So we can see that on open web, for example, about 80% of the branded moments that we captured were sitting at less than 20% of the impression volume that was expected. And if you think about what that means, it's quite significant in terms of, you know, whether the brand's even going to be seen. Social is 60%. So 60% of the branded moments we saw on socials, it fell at under 20% of the attention volume. TV has a slightly different, a flatter distribution, if you like. So the incidence on TV is less. So again, you know, the distribution of reach curves or attention decay has massive impact on reach curves, has massive impact on share of voice, share of market. It has impact on, you know, cost per completed view, or any sort of success metric that's using time in view as a metric of success. So it's particularly problematic. Next slide. Thank you. So just to finish up, what we know is that essentially Rob applied all the distributions to the creative work that we tested. And as you can see, that he, you know, found that higher amounts of attention actually does make quite a considerable difference in terms of the output of from a business outcome perspective. So basically, this makes perfect sense to me, because it sort of shows that good creative on high attention platforms will achieve better brand outcomes than good creative on low attention platforms. He also sort of talked about a couple of concepts that we've found. Well, I'm calling them laws now because we've seen them hold many, many times across many different boundary conditions. But Rob talked about the attention hierarchy, which is that the platform plays the biggest role in the amount of attention gain, and that the platform also defines how much attention the creative will get based on these boundaries, what we call attention elasticity. So this is the reason why we see the results we do. And this is, I was quite excited to be a part of it. This is a real world example of how critical attention is for creative to do its job. And I often talk about, you know, the reality is good creative does need a good stage, but, you know, if a platform doesn't offer good creative that stage, it has little chance to perform. So again, platform choice can dramatically undermine the potential of great advertising and great creative. So I think that's it from me. And I think this is the why. And I could talk about this for hours. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Rob. A lot to think about there, and I hope everyone listening in found it as kind of interesting, but as mind-stretching as I did, because this is, you know, this is a challenging problem, and we all need to really apply ourselves to it. So, whilst you all, and of course the panel, collect their thoughts for the Q&A in just a moment, I just thought I'd buy us all some thinking time just by summarising what I personally take away from this really, really important study. So there are kind of 5 key takeouts for me. First, that quite clearly, whatever anybody out there tells you, attention matters to effectiveness. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and nor anyone with any common sense would even suggest that. So attention matters to effectiveness. Second point is that good platform choices can considerably amplify the power of our creative work. So it's kind of a bit dumb to go to all the effort of producing great ads and then shoving them on low attention platforms. So that's we've really got to fix and know about. The third point is that by attention weighting platform choices, we can greatly improve the overall business impact of our media buy. So our advertising dollars will work a lot harder if we attention weight the choices we make. But more importantly, I'm a real optimist about this. And what I can see is that Karen's work is going to bring about a much needed realignment of platform pricing with business impact, which clearly just isn't the case at the moment. And when we've done that, hopefully we will fix the ESOV model and it will begin to work for us better. And then finally, a more general point really is that clearly what we're learning here is that excellence in both media and creativity make a big, big difference to attention and therefore to effectiveness. So there is a huge value in studying the excellence that we see in the Effie's database. And of course, I promised Tony I would say also the benefit you get from the discipline of writing in Effie's entry, because it will force you to think about these issues. But there are, to make a general point, clear lessons that we can only learn from excellence, that only by studying the kind of findings we get amongst the top performers in Effie competitions, only by studying them will we really learn how to take advertising dollars from being kind of average, mediocre to being extreme high performers. So excellence is valuable, on which note I will invite our excellent panel to switch on their cameras and mics and rejoin the conference call for the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter. I might start with the Q&A questions. There is a common question, Karen, for you and Rob, which is people are desperate to understand the difference between higher and lower attention. So anonymous attendee at 5:30, can you please uncloak the higher and lower attention platforms, please, to make it more real?
I'm going to let you answer that one, Karen.
I will answer that, and that's not why we're here. So I get asked that all the time, and I guess my answer is, yeah, I'm not going to reveal who wins the race or who doesn't win the race on this forum. And I will also say that every platform plays a role. So, you know, it is real. So I don't need to reveal, you know, all the different formats and platforms that all of the award entries included. But I think, you know, we've done enough work to understand that there's quite a clear division between high scrollable and non-scrollable. And I think that's where I usually draw the line, is kind of in that point. So, you know, how we define high and low is probably a good mix to sort of pull it right into the middle point. But I mean, we understand it right down to the sub-second level. So, you know, there's a lot of regression that's gone into this.
Okay. Karen, just to follow up, and I know it's not fair to ask you that question about naming a winner.
I know where you're going, Karen.
No, I'm not. No, I just that literally it's the bulk of the questions. Can you then give us some indication of the characteristics of a high attention platform?
Yeah. So like I said, so if you think about a distribution where people scroll away or skip away or have the opportunity to do something else and it's distracted by the user experience, those are typically lower in attention just by the nature of the fact that the human wants to do something else, so someone wants to read somewhere else or go to the next video or do whatever. But where you don't have those opportunities to do that, so non-scrollable, non-skippable, not easily exited, not easily distracted, those are the platforms that tend to give you more and less switching and more concentrated sort of attention to them.
Thank you.
So a general question, probably once again to Karen, but it might be Rob as well, is that I think it was Rob that mentioned that 85% of ads fail to achieve the 2.5 second attention benchmark. Does that mean that 85% of campaigns are not really cutting the creative mustard or are not achieving the potential they should from an effectiveness point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Rob can back me up on this one, but that's digital, right? So to be fair, it doesn't include anything that's scrollable, skippable, high clutter kind of platform. So it was done to sort of describe fairly long tail of programmatic in particular, but it doesn't describe the whole ecosystem, absolutely. But you're right, it also points out to many people that a large proportion of their budget gets under that threshold. Now, it's not to say it's not effective, right? It just says if you're building a brand and you're trying to drive memory structures and or you've got a new product and you're trying to sort of build a new variant, it's going to be pretty hard with a split second to do that.
Yeah, I think it's representative of some of the wider world of marketing because, we're looking right up at the top end of the scale here. I mean, the thing I'd mention really is, the thing about looking at the top end of the effectiveness spectrum, you saw the difference in campaign attention levels, even up at that end. So you could imagine that if you were to bring in the wider world from that, the kind of campaigns that don't enter the FEs, just how broad that distribution would be. So I think it all depends the lens with which you look at it. But there's a lot of money that goes into marketing in an awful lot of areas, and a lot of it go into areas that are very low in terms of effectiveness and attention.
Yeah, for me, can I just add to that? That for me, what I love about this so much, Rob, is that it indicates. So it kind of, I'm trying to move the conversation on from, does more attention work or not? What I'm trying to show people is if you understand how much attention a platform affords you by the nature of these boundaries called attention elasticity, you can do so much more. So you can plan for certain campaigns, short or long term. You can spend better. Your cost of your cost of goods sold will go down, all these sorts of things. So if you think more about a planning and buying, I guess, performance measure than sort of focusing so much on who does what, because 100% it's important, but it's also important to be able to just equalize this original sin error that happens behind the pipes. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, I think working with your data for the first time as well, I was surprised at how big the differences were as well.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to sort of say it, but I missed a slide, unfortunately, on my deck. But the volume piece, people underestimate that, right? So I showed you the fast decay, but what I should have showed you is what you expect. And what you expect is that distribution of the people that are watching is pretty solid. At least 80% of the impressions you buy, people are watching. But with that decay, which is caused by this original sin, it can be 20% at best. So 20% of the impressions you buy are not being accounted for in these concepts or metrics or, any success metric you use in your business, whether it's, mental availability, planning, MMs, econometrics, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
I could jump in with another quick one, Kim, because I think it relates to this, is that Tim Stanford has asked, what does frequency or frequency capping, how does frequency or frequency capping coming into attention and effectiveness?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, so from an attention perspective, it's actually quite interesting because, and I think Robbie sort of talk about this a little bit through the report, but essentially what it does is it corrects the wrongs, right? So you kind of said more attention essentially means that ESOV works harder, right? But it's kind of the same. So if you've got a low attention platform, then it's more likely, and what I told you about the brand incidents, so it's more likely that a lower attention platform, you won't even know who's advertising unless you have particularly distinctive assets, which not everyone does. So what happens with frequency, it's less about you're seeing it more. By about 9 by 3 or 4, you go, oh, you kind of actually work it out. So it's an inefficient way to buy media because you have to buy multiple frequency points to be able to get the same message across. Whereas if you'd have done it just on a slightly higher attention platform, you would have got it in one impact, which kind of goes back to the original one impact matters kind of comment.
That's quite fascinating when you think about it, because it means your CPM is actually, it's quite a lot higher.
People don't realize how inefficient, what false economy it is. Yes.
I'm going to change pace because I feel like we're neglecting our gorgeous creative community here. And there's been a number of questions around where would I go to look at the laws of creative excellence, or how did we define creative excellence with the sample that we tested, which I think probably is a Rob and Peter question.
Yeah, actually, Peter looked in some more detail at the ones that the higher and lower end of the spectrum. So, Peter, I'm going to handball to you for a bit.
Yeah, no, look, very, very happy to. Precisely a kind of question that I asked. Clearly, we've seen some quite big differences in the performance of the different ads. Being a kind of ex-planner, always I kind of want to ask the question. I want to lift the hood on that and look at it. It's far too early to report, but I mean, this is going to be the genesis, I think, of more work to come. But it's really interesting. I asked Rob to send me a sample of the kind of high performers and the low performers within the confines of the kind of structure of the research we were looking at. And I think you can, with a planner's mind anyway, spot some interesting differences between them. I think you can see why some ads seem to be able to work at the top end of the elasticity that they get on those platforms, whereas other ads tend to work at the bottom. I can't prove it because this is just yours truly looking at the ads, thinking structurally about them. And I think we need a bigger sample, and I think we need a more robust methodology to really do that. But I hinted in my intro that I think there is some evidence in there that an awful lot of the rules we've been given about how to do good video advertising they're not helpful. They're based on the early thinking that came out of particularly social media, which was that it's all about short-term effects. It's all about how you get that sale over quickly. Work done by System 1, for instance, with other databases, has already suggested that those kind of rules don't help us maximize the elasticity that we get from a platform, because they're designed for the social media platform, which, of course, Karen knows exactly what the limitations of the social media world are, but I couldn't possibly comment on that. But the fact of the matter is that if we want to develop powerful brand building ads, I think we're going to have to start learning afresh how to do that on digital. And, I think the big question out there in the world of marketing at the moment is, can I actually build a brand solely on digital? And if so, how do I do it? And what Karen's data teaches us, because of all of these attention issues, is it's actually an awful lot more difficult than any of us thought 10 years ago, and that we really need to learn the lessons of this, and we need to develop our creative act to be able to do that. And I think you're just going to have to wait a while. We will be working on that. I think it's almost certain to say, and hopefully next year we might be able to get back with some more thoughts on actually what is the best way to do this. But it's a work in progress.
But I couldn't
Rob.
agree more, honestly, Pete, because the reality is, in all the time we've been doing this, people are still building for the wrong format, right? They're still building ads in the same creative way that they always have. And like I've said to Kim, like it's about every platform plays a role, but we're not maximizing that. So it's this double jeopardy thing happening where we don't understand how much attention we're getting, but we're also not building the creative for format.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you made the point, Cam, which I think is really important, that the kind of branding issue is very important. It just depends on the creative assets that you've built, and the distinctive assets that you've built. And we've known for ages that even short attention of TV ads can trigger memories if we've seen the full form ad before, if we built it in people's minds before. So there is a value in it. It's just a question of making sure we pay the right amount for those kinds of reminder roles. And digital, I think, for many years now, has evidenced its ability to act as a support for, say, TV, once the brand has been built, once the assets have been built, serving reminders, if you like, on other platforms can still have a value. But you've got to pay appropriately for the value of what you're getting. And I think that's where Karen's data is going to really open a lot of eyes around the world, and change the way we pay for many of these different platforms. And we've got to do that, because building brands is vital to the success of branded businesses. And if we're not doing that efficiently, then brands will suffer. They're already suffering around the world. So we've got to get this right. It couldn't be more important.
Can I add one little tiny thing to that? I'm so sorry. So you were talking about how on platform A, this is Rob, how you were talking about platform A gets a certain amount of attention, platform B, it declines, platform C, it declines. And you were talking about we've published for 12 brands. Do you want to know we've done it across 350,000? So we've generalized it. So it's a pretty serious law-like, repeatable, generalizable fact now. So I'll definitely be doing more publishing. I haven't had time, I'm sorry.
Okay, now we said we were going to finish at 6, but last time, just as last time, we've got so many questions. If people want to hang around, and we've got a lot of people and a lot of questions to go, we'll extend it to about 6:15 because the panelists have made themselves available. And I'd like to ask this one question is, how does your attention data difference between low interest categories, e.g. a supermarket insurance ad targeting a very broad audience, versus high interest categories, e.g. an AFL ad to footy fans? Is there any data on that?
Yes, we do. So I think you've published the hierarchy of attention, Rob, in the report. But basically, there is a hierarchy, so platform, format, context, demographics, and creative is the one that suffers the most, unfortunately. But my point is that the context and the relevancy does play a role, but it still doesn't change. It doesn't change. There's still a boundary, right? So I know we only did 39 ads, but the reality is the boundaries pretty much stay at the same amount regardless of the high interest versus low interest category, because there are categories that are funner than others and there are ads that are funner than others. But the user experience is what's defining those ranges. And I think that's really important to know, that it's not because we've only, these are the only ads that we have. And so if you build a good ad, it will go viral. It doesn't, if you know my first book, it doesn't work that way, right? It sits within some boundaries. So to your point, category does play a role, but what it can do is it can nudge you up to the top of that elasticity, which is what Rob was talking about with good creative. So if you've got good platform, good formats, you've got good relevancy in creative, you've got emotional creative, and it's hitting the right audience, you're going to get at the top of that boundary, but it's unlikely that it'll go over because of how the user experience restricts that.
Can I do a follow-up question on that as well, which is around demographics as opposed to category? Is there sort of a variable around high and low attention based on demographics alongside categories? So demographics a difference?
It just really changes, Kim, because we now do it across 18 countries. So there is no rule of thumb. Demographics is such an interesting one. So because it depends on the penetration in the country, it depends on culture, it just depends. I mean, I often have said people would be surprised how low attention people are paying to platforms that they think youth are paying high attention to, and the opposite is sometimes true, but it does vary a lot. So I don't often use, I have stopped talking about demos because there's no real true rule of thumb, whereas this other stuff we just see over and over and over and over again, no matter what type of ads or what categories or what type of countries. But demographics is interesting, but it is quite variable.
Okay, thank you.
Is it me?
Yeah, it's you.
I've got one from John Bradshaw, typically provocative. Well done, John. Is there a conclusion to be drawn that the distinctive assets need to be in almost every frame, given the on-off nature of attention, even in high attention media? I've seen Karen's previous comments on go big early and often, but do we need to be more brutal than that with branding? And I think this goes across to some of the, not just Karen, but Rob and Peter might have an attitude, have a feeling on this as well.
No, Rob, sorry, Rob, for jumping in. I just think this is a point that we need to be clear about. We are not saying that we literally have to brand every frame. I mean, distinctive assets are much more complex and much more subtle than that. You know, some brands have a unique tonal feel. You can spot an ad of that particular brand without seeing a logo or a kind of clown or whatever it is. So there are many ways you can brand an ad from the get-go without actually having to put kind of more clunky things up front. It's a much more subtle art than that, and I think great creative people have always understood that, and it's one of the ways in which campaigns kind of develop over time. There may well be difficulty in the early. I'm sure many of us have worked on campaigns where in the early days it was kind of difficult to land the branding, but it got easier over time as the assets built and people kind of became familiar with them. And that is likely to be the case. So I would hate anyone to think that the inevitable corollary of Karen's, kind of flitting in and out attention thing is that every goddamn second has to have a logo on. We're not saying that, but we are saying, though, that the clarity of branding is an important thing generally across the ad. That's my take on it. Rob, you may think differently.
I agree. I don't think it's just a case of slapping the logo on. I mean, it brings to mind the Grand Effie winner at Uber Eats this year, and I know they had a very tight ad construct and they followed that for 5 years. But yeah, talking to the team there, they're people who are responsible for looking out for distinctive assets when they're creating new ads, and they're able to brand or put in codes within those ads where it's got nothing to do with the logo and things like that. It's just that those assets took quite a long time to build. It's 5 years over all that campaign. So I agree. I think, my time on the commercial side, I was always frustrated by how little focus there was on developing brand codes or things that didn't involve the logo or a color. It's just, I think it's a fine art and it's really difficult. Maybe that's why people backed away from it a little bit more, but it's absolutely critical because for me, the Karen's chart, which just shows attention pinging in and out the whole time, you have a very small window in which to land the message and the brand within that. And so it's all about probabilities at the end of the day. The stronger the codes that link to it, the higher the probability that they'll link it to the brand, the higher the probability that the messaging that you've crafted in there will percolate through and start to impact the brand's memory structures. It's this kind of cascade of second, third, fourth order effects, but it all comes from knowing what brand it's for. And it's the opposite is true, Rob, right? So we've done plenty of work on mental availability and shown that lower attention platforms actually work harder for your competitors. Even if for those reasons, because people switch more often and the volume drops pretty fast, right? So yeah, it's a positive slant on it, but you also have to think about it from a negative perspective. And to your point, distinctive assets takes a long time to build. And Jenny would say, it's not just logos or, it's colors and sounds and, jingles and all sorts of things. So, just build as many as you can in an inattention world.
Picking up on that thread, a question from Jolan. There have been a lot of studies over the years estimating the contribution to effectiveness of creativity or the execution. Joe reckons that's sitting at about 60 to 80%, where media's less than 30%. Based on this most recent body of work, do you think that the contribution of creative and media needs to be reevaluated? And if it does, what would be your thoughts on that?
So if you're asking me, I published on this and I called it the chicken and egg. And the study that is often most touted as the single source of truth was at a time when a product was being delivered around creative effectiveness. So I'm very cautious of the effect that that particular study had and the flow-on effects. And the reality is, if you don't isolate creative when you're trying to look at media impact, then you're going to have a fairly muddied outcome. So do read that paper. I think it was in MediaTel. So it's chicken and egg, and it talks about which one comes first, creative or media, and it kind of unpacks that study, and it kind of describes why I think it's done us a disservice. So the answer is, I believe so, because like I said, I see the same pattern happening, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of brands. And if the creative was the principal driver, you would see the same amount of attention across all the different platforms. You see one ad, if you got 30 seconds on attention on TV, you would get 30 seconds on TikTok, you would get 30 seconds on, YouTube, you get 30 seconds on programmatic, and you don't. There's a change. So 100% I call for more work on that.
Yeah, no, I think clearly, if I could just leap in there, because I think this is really interesting. Clearly, what has happened in the last 20 years is that the media dimension has become dramatically more important than it used to be, because we kind of used to know the way media worked, and we had the data to reliably assess it, and media planners could kind of make informed choices. But clearly, that's not the case at the moment. But Karen's work, I think, will change that very rapidly. So I think we'll get back into an era where, perhaps in a curious way, I think Karen's work will make it less important, because we will be paying the right amount for media choices, which we're not at the moment. So I think it'll come back in balance. But I think you just have to bear in mind one thing, which is that Karen's company is immensely successful, and I'm 100% confident that she's going to change the way media is thought about and bought around the world. So all sensible, smart advertisers around the world will be using her data to ensure that their advertising dollars buy what they think they're buying with them. At which point it becomes a kind of level playing field again, doesn't it? How is one company going to achieve competitive advantage over another when they're all using the same data to make the same media buys? And when that day comes, and I think with Karen's help, it's going to come pretty damn soon, then the attention is going to swing back to creativity, because that is what will then deliver the power over and above the smart buys. So we've got both, but we've got to keep measuring attention, because it's such a fast developing world, the world of media. We're always going to have to keep a check on new platforms and new developments. But once we've got that buy right, then creativity will again become our big point of competitive differential advantage. It's my simple perspective on it.
It's an awesome perspective. Yeah, awesome.
So we're working through the revolution right now.
Yeah, I mean, my job's done when that happens, right? And that's all I care about, that the error or the original sin is normalized or equalized, and then the creatives can come back and do what they do beautifully. 100% love it.
It's a good revolution. You can probably see this kind of sniper target just somewhere in the back of Karen's room there at the moment.
Well, I thought a t-shirt rather than a sniper rifle, but sure.
Yep, that's normal.
We've probably got time for one or two questions. There's one here that sort of picks up on, I think, memory structures and assets in communications, but it's an interesting one from a media agency planner point of view. You've spoken specifically about active eyes-on attention. In your opinion, do you see a role for passive attention when considering the various jobs to be done in a campaign response?
100%. So there are 3 levels of attention noted in psychology literature, right? So we followed those rules and built the technology to collect active, passive, and non. But 100% passive is important. It just plays a different role, right? But it's more complicated, because you kind of already have to have some sort of idea who the brand is if you're not really looking at it, but you get who it is, right? So it's much more complicated. So when I went into this a few years back, it was like, well, the obvious one is you want people to look at your ad so that you actually can process what it's doing. But with all of the things that we plan around and all of the product we actually use both. And in fact, we even go deeper. So we're at the point now, it's not seconds anymore. It's a combination of how there are sort of about 6 different types of viewers, and some kind of watch really sustained and others kind of do this. And it's using both passive and active, and that proportion of that you can actually predict an outcome from it. So we started with active, Tony, because it was just an easy, simple concept, active attention time, but it's much, much deeper now. And, it's much more predictive of real human behavior. But again, the big depends, because there's no rule of thumb around passive. So I tend not to kind of, whereas with active, you get more active, you're at least, things are going to change.
Karen, one from an anonymous attendee. How can clients or agencies start to measure active attention?
That's another conversation for another time. I don't want to, let's talk about that offline. But definitely get in touch. Definitely get in touch.
So there you go, anonymous attendee. Reach out to Professor Nelson Field and she will help you.
Look, if we could keep going further, there's about 30 more questions that we can't get to. But yeah, I think we've got to start wrapping it up. But maybe we could, Kim, throw to the panel and see if each of them have got any last words that they'd like to sum up what we've done today, and before thanking them.
Great idea. Panel, do you have any last thoughts that you would like to share?
The only thing I'd say is that, and I've probably said it during during this whole thing as well, is I was surprised at how much difference it made. Thinking about boundaries of attention across different channels, it is like, if you start to think about it that way in your mind, I think it will really start to hit home how different it is and how important it is. And for me, that was one of my biggest learnings, during this, the last few months, was really just how tangible that difference is. I'm sure other people will be much more eloquent, so I'll pitch to Peter or Karen.
From my side, I wasn't surprised. But what I loved about this opportunity was that we didn't do the analysis. We provided the data and Rob did it. So what I love about it is that it is a real world example that we haven't had anything to do with. And I mean, we see this kind of every day as media planners use it globally, but to be able to print this and to show people that difference that you were shocked about, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
And finally, I just add that clearly there is an enormous job still to be done on this. There is still a lot of work to be done on making sure that attention data guides our thinking. So, there are plenty of people out there who say everything's great, everything's fine in the world of advertising. All we need to do is kind of keep going in the same direction. I fundamentally question that. I think there are some big issues to fix. Karen's helping us fix that, but there are also other issues to do with creativity that we need to fix. There are lots that we need to do before we properly turn the corner on what has been a pretty poor kind of decade and a half of performance in terms of advertising effectiveness. So let's rise to the challenge. Let's take this as a way forward and an evidence that we've got the tools to do it, but let's keep working at it.
Perfect.
I feel like after hearing you three on the panel, we've only just started to scratch the surface of it all. But it's great to hear you all. And thank you, Karen, Rob, and Peter, for your time. And Kim, once again, for your wonderful support. We've now issued a document. It's for discussion. It's downloadable from our website already. There's some nickable charts. And hopefully this generates a lot of discussion going forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.